It was a crisp autumn morning in 1987 when Margaret Ellis laced up her worn-out running shoes and stepped out onto the dew-covered grass. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, and the surface of Lake Hollow lay perfectly still, a silver mirror, waiting for the first ripples of daybreak. Margaret's neighbors would later recall seeing her jog past their porches, waving casually, a wool scarf fluttering around her neck. She always ran the same route, down the gravel path, past the old boathouse, and into the thin trail that wound along the water's edge. By 8:15 a.m., she was gone. Not just from the trail, from the town itself. The morning sun rose higher, but Margaret never returned. Her husband, Robert, assumed she'd stopped for coffee at Millie's diner. But when noon came and went, and her plate of pancakes sat untouched, worry began to creep in. That afternoon, a search party combed the lakeshore. They found nothing, no footprints, no broken branches, no sign of a struggle. Just one thing, Margaret's scarf, caught on a low branch above the water, dry, as if it had been placed there deliberately. By late afternoon, the crisp brightness of the day had faded into a dull, anxious haze. Volunteers with flashlights and dogs paced the wooded trail around Lake Hollow. That's when Officer Daniel spotted an older man lingering near the boathouse, his gaze fixed on the path Margaret had taken. "Sir, can I help you?" Daniels asked, stepping closer. The man shifted uncomfortably. "Just remembering," he murmured, his voice low and gravelly. When pressed, he admitted he'd been walking the trail that morning, the same time as Margaret. He claimed he'd seen her stop, take off her scarf, and look back down the path, as if someone was following her. "Did you see who?" Daniels asked. The man hesitated. "No. Just shadows in the trees." By the next day, locals were calling him the man in the green jacket. Some swore they'd seen him hanging around the diner in the weeks before Margaret disappeared. Others insisted he was harmless, just a reclusive war veteran who liked the quiet of the lake. But when the police tried to question him again, he was gone. His cabin, a mile from the trailhead, stood empty. The bed was made. The refrigerator was cleared out. In the dust on the cabin floor, someone had drawn a rough outline of Lake Hollow, and marked a single X in the middle of the water. That night, the wind off Lake Hollow carried a bitter chill, but the search teams refused to stop. 2 police boats glided across the dark surface, their spotlights cutting narrow tunnels through the mist. On the shore, a small crowd had gathered, their breath hanging in the air, eyes fixed on the divers preparing to descend. Sergeant Keller, a man who'd worked the lake for 20 years, leaned over the rail. "Visibility's gonna be near zero down there. Watch for the drop-off, it goes deep fast." The first diver vanished beneath the water with a muted splash. Seconds dragged into minutes. Then, through the static of the radio, his voice came. I think I've got something." The surface broke, and he emerged holding a sodden leather glove, the kind Margaret often wore on her morning runs. But this one had deep, deliberate slashes across the palm. By midnight, they'd searched the area around the X marked in the cabin's drawing. Nothing else surfaced. No body. No clothes. No trace. The sheriff ordered them to stop until morning. But as the last boat returned to shore, one of the volunteers swore she saw it, a faint ripple, far out in the middle of the lake, moving against the wind. When dawn broke, the X in the cabin's drawing had been scratched out, and replaced with a second one, closer to the shore. By the third day, the search had gone from an urgent rescue to a grim recovery mission. Reporters from 2 counties away set up their tripods near the boathouse, and the townsfolk, they started talking. Mrs. Calloway, who'd lived by Lake Hollow all her life, told a young journalist that the lake had a hunger. Her grandmother had warned her never to swim there after dusk, said the water could keep a secret better than any man. Digging through the dusty archives of the Millfield Gazette, Officer Daniels found something that made his stomach turn. A clipping from 1923, local girl disappears while picking wildflowers by Lake Hollow. Only her hat found, placed neatly on a rock. A nearly identical disappearance in 1956. And again in 1971. Always a woman. Always near the water. And always, one object left behind, untouched by the elements. That evening, Robert Ellis, Margaret's husband, sat on the porch with Sergeant Keller. His hands trembled as he admitted something he'd never told the police. 2 weeks before Margaret vanished, she'd woken him in the middle of the night, claiming she'd heard a woman crying by the shore. When they looked, the lake was empty, but the sound carried, soft and broken, across the still water. The next morning, as search crews prepared to drag the new marked area, a heavy fog rolled in. And from somewhere in the white haze came a faint, drawn-out scream, too far to place, but close enough that every man on the dock froze in place. The fog was so thick it felt solid, swallowing the outlines of the docks and boats. Sound carried strangely, muffled one moment, echoing the next, as if the lake itself were listening. Sergeant Keller ordered 2 boats out despite the poor visibility. The men moved slowly, engines low, eyes straining to see more than a few feet ahead. Somewhere out there was the second X from the cabin's map, and maybe the truth about what happened to Margaret. Halfway across, one of the spotlights caught movement, a pale shape drifting just beneath the surface. The diver slid into the water, heart hammering, and reached out. His hand closed not on a body, but on a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Inside were 3 items. A woman's silver bracelet, initials ME etched inside. An old, waterlogged photograph of a young girl standing by the same lake, dated 1956. And a small glass vial, corked, containing what looked like lake water, but it shimmered faintly, as if holding light of its own. Back on shore, Robert Ellis confirmed the bracelet belonged to Margaret. She never took it off. But no one could explain the photo, or why the girl looked almost exactly like Margaret, only younger, and dressed in clothing from 30 years earlier. As Keller sealed the vial in an evidence bag, the glass warmed in his hands. And from the fog over the lake came a whisper, almost too faint to catch, "She's not the first, and she won't be the last." The photograph, still damp from the lake, sat under a desk lamp in the sheriff's office. The girl's face stared back, pale, unsmiling, her eyes fixed on the camera with unsettling clarity. On the back, in faded ink, Clara, summer 56. Officer Daniels dug into old police records. In the summer of 1956, Clara Whitmore, age 17, disappeared near Lake Hollow. She'd been last seen picking flowers by the shore. Her straw hat was found on a rock. No body was ever recovered. The case had been quietly closed, marked presumed drowned. Comparing the faces side by side, Margaret and Clara could have been sisters, same bone structure, same eyes. But genealogical records showed no relation. Stranger still, in the weeks before her disappearance, Clara had told friends she kept dreaming of a woman calling her name from the water. That night, Robert Ellis sat alone, the bracelet clutched in his hand. He remembered something Margaret had said just days before she vanished. "I feel like I've been here before, Rob, like I've lived this already." He'd laughed it off at the time, thinking it was just poetic talk. Now, with the photograph on the table, it felt more like a warning. The following morning, another envelope arrived at the sheriff's office. No return address. Inside, a fresh, glossy photograph. The same spot by Lake Hollow. And standing there, in the mist, was Margaret. The photograph lay on the sheriff's desk, its glossy surface catching the morning light. Margaret stood at the shoreline, her hair slightly windblown, the mist curling at her feet. But what made everyone's stomach drop was the timestamp in the corner, 2 days after she'd disappeared. Sergeant Keller sent the print to the state lab, demanding analysis. Hours later, the technician's voice trembled over the phone. "The paper and ink are brand new. Whoever took this, did it within the last 48 hours. Officer Daniels noticed something else. In the far background of the image, almost swallowed by fog, a small boat floated near the center of the lake. No one recognized it. And it wasn't among any of the search vessels. That evening, Mrs. Calloway came to the station with an old leather-bound journal. It belonged to her grandfather, a fisherman. The last entry, dated 1923, described seeing a white boat drifting in the mist, where no boat should be. On the same day the first recorded disappearance occurred. Robert Ellis, pale and exhausted, stared at the photograph of his wife. "If she's still out there," he whispered, "then she's trying to tell us something. Or, she's warning us to stay away." That night, under a full moon, the same white boat appeared again, this time, drifting silently toward the dock, and no one on board. The white boat drifted in slow arcs, bumping gently against the dock with each ripple of water. No oars. No anchor. The paint was chipped in places, revealing an older, darker wood beneath. On the bow, someone had scratched a symbol, a circle split by a jagged line, like a crack in glass. Sergeant Keller climbed in first, flashlight sweeping over the empty benches. The air inside felt colder than the night itself, carrying a faint, metallic smell. Under the middle bench, wrapped in oilskin, lay a second glass vial, identical to the one found earlier, but this one was cracked. The lake water inside shimmered the same strange way, and clung to the glass like it was alive. In the stern, wedged between the planks, Officer Daniels pried out a folded sheet of paper. It was a page torn from a modern-day tourist map of Lake Hollow, only the shoreline had been marked with red dots, each with a date. The most recent was 2 days ago, the day Margaret vanished. Keller turned the map over. On the back, scrawled in rushed, uneven handwriting, were 3 words. "Don't follow her." The handwriting didn't match Robert's, Margaret's, or anyone in the police files. But lab tests would later reveal something even stranger. The ink contained microscopic fragments of algae found only in the deepest part of Lake Hollow, more than 30 meters down. As they pulled the boat ashore, the fog shifted just enough to reveal a lone figure standing on the far end of the dock. A woman, hair damp, wearing the same scarf Margaret had the morning she disappeared. And then, without a sound, she stepped backward into the mist and was gone. Keller's shout split the cold air. "Stop! Police!" But the figure didn't turn. She drifted backward into the fog, steps light and deliberate, as if the boards of the dock barely carried her weight. Officer Daniels broke into a run, boots thudding against the planks. The mist swallowed his flashlight beam, turning it into a pale, useless halo. Somewhere ahead, the woman's silhouette flickered in and out of sight, always just beyond reach. The scarf, Margaret's scarf, caught briefly on a railing post, and Daniels lunged for it. His fingers grazed the wool, and it slipped away, as though pulled from the other side. Then came the sound, faint at first, like a distant hum, growing into something almost melodic. It wasn't a scream, not exactly. More like a voice calling, layered with echoes, as if many voices spoke through one mouth. Keller's voice crackled over the radio. "She's heading toward the North Pier. Cut her off." But when Daniels burst onto the pier, heart pounding, the mist parted for a moment, revealing only the still, black water. No ripples. No sign of a fall. At the very end of the pier lay the scarf, neatly folded, with a wet footprint beside it. The print was small, delicate, and icy to the touch, as if pressed into the wood by something not entirely human. As Daniels knelt to examine the footprint, a shadow moved beneath the surface of the water, the unmistakable shape of a woman, eyes open, looking straight up at him, and smiling. The morning after the encounter on the pier, the water was unnervingly still. The fog had lifted, but the air carried the same metallic tang as the night before. Sergeant Keller assembled the dive team, this time with a single, precise objective: search directly beneath the North Pier where the figure had vanished. As the divers slipped into the water, bubbles rose in slow, lazy spirals. The lake floor here dropped off abruptly, from 2 meters to more than 30 in a sheer, shadowed descent. Their flashlights cut narrow beams through the darkness, illuminating drifting silt and pale shapes that dissolved before they could be recognized. At 25 meters, one diver's beam struck something unnatural, the jagged corner of a wooden structure, half buried in the sediment. It wasn't a boat. It wasn't debris. It was a door, still set in its warped frame, as if leading into the lakebed itself. Bolted to the door was an iron ring, and from it hung a length of frayed rope. A fragment of green wool, the exact shade of Margaret's scarf, clung to the fibers. The team secured the area and, with a cautious heave, pulled the door open. A cloud of silt exploded outward, swallowing their lights. When it cleared, they saw what lay beyond, a narrow passage sloping deeper into the earth, its walls made of stacked stones slick with algae. And on those stones, faint carvings, circles split by jagged lines, identical to the symbol on the white boat. Before they could proceed, a sudden current surged from the passage, strong enough to shove one of the divers back. Through the swirling water, just beyond the threshold, 2 pale hands appeared, gripping the stone frame from the inside. And then, slowly, a face leaned into the light. Margaret's face. The image of Margaret's face under the water froze the team in place. For a long moment, no one moved, afraid that even the smallest gesture would make her vanish. But she didn't. Her eyes were wide, her hair drifting around her like dark smoke, and her lips moved slowly, forming words the divers could not hear. Sergeant Keller signaled, and 2 divers eased forward, crossing the threshold into the stone-lined passage. The temperature dropped instantly, their breath rasped louder in their masks, and the light from their torches seemed swallowed by the walls. Just a few meters in, the passage opened into a vast chamber, carved as if by human hands centuries ago. In the center stood a stone plinth, its surface engraved with dozens of names. The earliest was from 1842, the most recent, Margaret Ellis. Beside each name was a small hollow in the stone, filled with that same shimmering lake water found in the glass vials. The divers swept their lights across the chamber and froze. Around the perimeter stood figures, dozens of them, pale, still, eyes closed. They were suspended in the water, upright, as if standing in a crowd, but not breathing. And among them, unmistakably, was Clara Whitmore, the girl from the 1956 photograph. Margaret was there too, yet her eyes were open, fixed on the divers. She lifted a hand and pointed upward, toward the surface, before pressing a finger to her lips. Before they could react, a low, resonant sound began to pulse through the chamber, shaking the water and vibrating in their chests. The names on the plinth began to glow faintly, and the shimmering liquid in each hollow started to swirl, as if the lake itself had awakened. The divers broke the surface gasping, their voices muffled by the weight of what they had seen below. The morning sun glinted harmlessly on the lake, as if the water had never hidden a chamber of names and motionless figures. Sergeant Keller hauled himself onto the dock, ripping off his mask. "We're done here," he barked, though his eyes betrayed a deep unease. But as the team began stowing their gear, one of the younger divers froze. "Where's Peterson?" All heads turned. The rookie's tank bobbed at the surface a few yards away, but there was no sign of him. Then, without warning, a hand broke the water, gripping the edge of the dock. Everyone leaned in, relief ready to spill, until they saw the skin, pale, pruned, and cold as ice. The hand wasn't Peterson's. From beneath the dock, a face rose slowly, eyes open, lips forming a word none of them could hear. The grip loosened, and the figure slid soundlessly back into the depths, leaving only a ring of ripples that spread toward shore. That night, Officer Daniels sat in his car outside the Ellis home, keeping watch. The bracelet they'd recovered from the lake lay on the passenger seat. At 3:17 a.m., the air grew unnaturally still. The lake was a black mirror in the moonlight, until a single ripple spread from its center, heading straight for the shoreline. Daniel's radio crackled once and went dead. And from the water's edge, a faint voice called his name. When he turned, Margaret was standing there, dripping wet, eyes wide, holding the cracked glass vial in her hand. She pressed it into his palm and whispered, "It's not over." Daniel stared at the cracked vial in his palm. The shimmering water inside pulsed faintly, like it was alive. Margaret's eyes held his, desperate, but clear. "It's not just me," she said. "They're all still there. And if we don't end it, there'll be more." Sergeant Keller and 2 officers burst from the tree line, weapons raised, but Margaret didn't flinch. She looked past them, toward the lake, where the moonlight was bending unnaturally, drawing a pale spiral in the water's center. Margaret told them what she'd seen below. The chamber wasn't just a tomb, it was a prison, and the lake was its keeper. Every generation, it claimed someone new, binding them in the water. The vials, they were keys, each one holding a fragment of the lake's power. Return them all, and the bond would break, but so would the seal. Whatever had been trapped down there would be free. Keller's jaw tightened. "So either we leave it as it is, and the disappearances go on. Or we open the door and let something worse out." Margaret stepped closer to Daniel's. "I can't go back down there again. If I do, I won't come out. But you can choose." The spiral in the water deepened, forming a dark hole that seemed to pull at the air itself. In the silence, the faint sound of many voices, some pleading, some warning, rose from the depths. Daniels looked at the vial in his hand, then at Margaret, then at the black water. He took a step forward. Daniels stood at the edge of the dock, the cracked vial cold in his hand. The whirlpool in the lake was no longer just spinning, it was breathing, pulling and releasing the air like some living thing. From deep below came the chorus of voices, low and resonant, rattling the planks beneath his feet. "If you decide," Margaret said softly, "do it quickly." He looked at her, dripping wet, eyes filled with both fear and hope, and then stepped forward. The water burned with cold as it swallowed him. The roar of the depths filled his ears, and light above dwindled to a pale smudge. At last, the stone chamber appeared, the plinth in its center etched with dozens of names. The most recent read, Margaret Ellis. Daniels fit the cracked vial into its empty slot. Instantly, every hollow in the stone blazed with light. The dark water shuddered. The still figures around the chamber began to dissolve into shimmering silver clouds, drifting upward. A column of light erupted from the center, tearing toward the surface. The voices went silent. Daniels felt hands, gentle, familiar, pushing him upward. He turned. Margaret was there, smiling through the rippling glow. "Thank you," her lips formed before she vanished into the light. He broke the surface, gasping for air. The whirlpool was gone, the lake flat and calm as glass. On shore, Keller stood staring. "Where is she?" he asked. Daniel squeezed water from his hair, eyes fixed on the horizon. "She's free," he said quietly. A week later, the search was officially called off. The lake was silent again. But sometimes, in the early morning mist, fishermen swore they saw a white boat gliding across the still water, empty, except for the faint ripples curling behind it, as if guided by unseen hands.